Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to the Washington Outsider Report. Here on the Coalition Radio, with you is Irina Zuckerman. That's me. I'm the editor in chief of the Washington Outsider, and our guest today, originally from Brazil, is Igor Sabino. He's a PhD student, and he's also the director of the Brazilian chapter of the Philos project, and he'll tell us a little bit about what that is and about his studies. We'll be discussing today the recent Biden administration delisting of FARC, a terrorist and a narco terrorist organization in Colombia. What effect that might have on other organizations in Latin America, on Iran's activity in the region, on Israel's relations with Colombia, and what we expect to see in terms of the future of these countries. And but we'll start with an introduction to our speaker. Igor, please tell us a little about yourself, what you're studying, what's the Philos project, and how you ended up working with them.
First of all, good night, good evening. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's such a great pleasure for me to be here tonight to discuss about these issues that are so important. And as you mentioned, I'm a PhD student. I'm doing a PhD in political science, and I research about issues related to religion and international politics. So right now, my focus is the U.S. foreign policy for the Middle East and the promotion of religious freedom in the region. And I work with the Philos Project here in Brazil. I'm the leader of the chapter, and our activities here in Brazil are focused mainly on promotion of pluralism in the Middle East and trying to educate Brazilian Christians about anti-Semitism and the plight of the persecuted Christians in the region. The Philos Project is a Christian organization based in New York that aims to promote positive Christian engagement in the Near East. And we are doing some kind of work with the Latino community and also in the Western Hemisphere here in Brazil and the rest of South America because it is a very strategic region, not only for the US but also for Israel and for the US allies in the Middle East.
Oh, that's great. And how did you come? How did you find them? How did you meet with the Philos group?
I met Philos in 2016. I was doing my master's in international relations, and I was writing about the plight of the persecuted Christians in Iraq. And then I found an article written by Robert Nicholson, the director of Philos, at Providence magazine. And then I started following him on Twitter. And then I heard about one of the Philos leadership programs. One of them is called Philos Leadership Institute. So I applied for it. I was accepted, and in 2017, I spent 1 month with Philos traveling around Israel, the Palestinian territories, Jordan, Poland, New York. And after that, I became part of the network and started thinking about ways to promote positive Christian engagement in the Near East, but from Brazil and in Latin America as a whole. We have a lot of connections here in Brazil with the Near East. We have one of the largest Jewish communities outside of Israel, and we also have more Lebanese people living in Lebanon, in Brazil actually, than Lebanon itself. So we have a lot of historical and cultural ties, but unfortunately, these relations they are not always so good, and they are not always explored. So I tried to kind of start this job here, this work here.
Oh, I would most certainly agree with you on that. I'm actually finding it shocking how little serious attention is dedicated in Washington to Latin America and to Brazil in particular. I'm hoping to do in the future a program on BRICS and their and the activities of that bloc, and of course many future programs related to the region. For now, it's suffice to say that outside one or two mentions of regional meetings once or twice a year that a member of the Senate will visit on an annual basis. There's very little discussion of the region, and once in a while you hear about sanctions on Nicaragua or some concern about Venezuela or something of that sort. But overall, there doesn't seem to be a very coherent and consistent policy engagement with any one country that's and nothing that's being discussed. What we hear about the most is the migrant crisis on the borders, but not the roots of those crises or what causes those issues to begin with, for sure, which is very unfortunate. And actually, this is probably why it may come to the surprise of many that Israel has developed so many positive relations with Latin American countries, including with Colombia, including with Brazil. And Colombia for the U.S. has been a long-term partner on security issues, and the president Ruby, a lot has been achieved since then. It's been a little bit more complicated. The refugee crisis in the area, for instance, threatens Colombia's stability. But what has been not discussed until very recently is Iran's activity in that area. We hear sometimes about Iran with relation to Venezuela, to sometimes to the Brazil Paraguay kind of um, Argentina nexus. We don't hear about it with respect to Colombia a lot. This has changed recently when an Israeli businessman was nearly assassinated there. And since then, there's been a discussion that this will actually bring Colombia and Israel closer. Now, what do you think it's true? I mean, I recently saw an article about this that is saying that this cooperation, this intelligence cooperation related to Iran's activities in the area, will actually strengthen um, the two countries. I want to start with that and kind of get to FARC in a little bit. First of all, how did Israel and Colombia develop that relationship to begin with, and how did it come that it's close enough for them to have effectively worked together to basically uncover the cell of assassins and terrorists?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. Well, it's very interesting to trace the beginning of the relations between not only Israel and Colombia, but I think that between Israel and the countries of South America as a whole, and that includes Brazil. When Israel was created, in 1947, when there was the resolution at the UN to divide Palestine and create Israel, some countries they supported the resolution, like Brazil, because of their interest with the U.S., and other countries like Colombia they remained neutral. Colombia didn't vote. Colombia abstained from voting, and then in 1949, 1950, basically all the countries in the region recognized Israel as a country, as a state. And after that, many countries in the region they tried to be neutral concerning the conflict, and that meant supporting all the resolutions concerning the conflict. So that meant also standing basically against Israel in some aspect, because some of the resolutions at the UN concerning the conflict they were very pro-Palestine. Um, but at the same time, there was this interest in these countries concerning what Israel could give them concerning security. So even Brazil, we have a lot of deals with Israel concerning security. But in the case of Colombia, the changing started in the beginning of the years 2000, after the 9/11 and the so-called war on terror. Colombia is one of the main U.S. allies in South America, so the Colombian government started to see the FARC as a terrorist threat and tried to deal with that in that way. And at the same time, we started to realize that there were some cells of terrorist groups like Hezbollah and Hamas in South America and also in Colombia. We have this here in Brazil, and as you mentioned, on the tri border between Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. We even had that incident, the terrorist attack of AMIA in Argentina. And then when the Colombians realized that Hezbollah was also a threat because they were cooperating with the FARC concerning uh, the drug trafficking, they started to cooperate with Israel on security issues. But at the same time, it was a more discreet relationship. In 2019, 18, for example, Colombia recognized the Palestinian state. But when Colombia started to get closer to Israel, there were some concerns, especially in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez, that was aligned more with Iran, started to blame Colombia for siding with Israel. And here in South America, there is a very strong anti-Israel and anti-US rhetoric, especially among some sectors of the left. So there was this idea that Israel is an imperialist state, and Colombia was kind of betraying the rest of South America by siding with Israel. But recently, that changed. Now we have more politicians that are openly for Israel, like my president himself, Bolsonaro in Brazil. He says several times that he is for Israel, that he wants to move the embassy, the Brazilian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But in the case of Colombia, it started with the new president, that he became closer to Netanyahu, and Colombia signed an economic agreement with Israel that was very meaningful, and now Colombia is one of the main allies of Israel in the region.
That's quite a shift there, and given the a lot of the populist movements in the region, it's almost miraculous that things have shifted so far and so quickly in the pro-Israel direction. But yeah, interesting you mentioned that there's a number of different terrorist organizations in Colombia and Brazil. You mentioned Hezbollah, you mentioned Hamas, and you mentioned the Lebanese communities there. Can you talk about how those communities came about in Latin America? It seems quite quite a different, quite far away from the Middle East.
Yeah. So the Lebanese and Syrian immigration to Brazil started even during the time of the Ottoman Empire, because we had an emperor here in Brazil, and Brazil was still an empire, Dom Pedro II, Dom Peter II. He was a Christian, and he was what we call today an Orientalist. He spoke several languages, among them Hebrew and Arabic. So he decided to go to the Middle East in the 19th century. So he went to what is now recognized as Lebanon, Syria, Israel, in Egypt. And when he got there, he said that Brazil was open for the Lebanese Christians, and some of them started to immigrate to Brazil. Some of them say that they immigrated because of religious persecution, but there's a lot of debate among the historians about that. The fact is that we had a growing migration of Lebanese to Brazil. Some of them were called Turkish because their passport was issued from the Ottoman Empire, but they were not Turkish. They were Lebanese and Syrian Christians, and many of them settled in São Paulo. But then we had the Lebanese War at the end of the 70s, 1970s to the 90s, and many Muslims they started to come to Brazil and settle on the border close to Argentina and Uruguay. And we also have in other Latin American countries a lot of Palestinian refugees that came here after the creation of Israel, and they are mostly Muslim communities, but especially here in Brazil, those who are on the south, they are Muslim, and many of them are have ties to Hezbollah, and Brazil doesn't recognize Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. That has been an issue of a lot of debate inside Brazil, because Hezbollah is also a political party in Lebanon. I think that's also one of the complexities of talking about the FARC and Hezbollah and Hamas, because these are terrorist organizations that now also have a political party branch. So they run for elections, they have political representatives. So the Brazilian government was afraid of recognizing Hezbollah as a terrorist group because that could harm the interests of Brazil and Lebanon, and also um, these Lebanese communities inside of Brazil, their economic ties, and the relations with also the Lebanese community, the Brazilian community actually in Lebanon. The Brazilian government was afraid that it could be harmed if this country recognized Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. So it's really complicated to deal with this. Actually, there isn't much discussion about the role of Hezbollah and Hamas in the south. There were some discussions about that in previous governments because some outlets, media outlets, they used to accuse the left-wing government of being in relations with Hezbollah and Hamas and supporting those groups. So there's a lot of misinformation actually about the status of those groups in Brazil.
What do you mean by disinformation?
uh, we don't, you know, even researchers, political scientists and professors of international relations research about security. They don't research a lot about Hezbollah and the role of these groups. So we don't have much information about them. We don't have like official reports. We know there are some reports by ABIN, that's the Brazilian intelligence agents, but of course we don't have access to them, just the
Yeah.
government. Some former officials, they have written books and said some things. They said that in some moments they warned the Brazilian government to take an action, but the Brazilian government didn't do anything. And right now we don't know exactly what is the official policy of the government concerning these groups. We know they exist, but it's also sometimes complicated to track them because there's a lot of um, laundry of money and illegal activities. So it's Brazil also has some problems concerning drugs, and our policies on the border are very complicated, and so this part of that.
It's interesting because in the US, one of the main researchers about Hezbollah, Matthew Levine, has actually done a lot of touched on the issue of Hezbollah presence in Latin America, but he is very one of the very few people even here who has delved into that specific area. And I've heard of a couple of researchers, one of whom was planning to go and do some exploring in the near the border area, which we uh, um, discussed briefly, but I'm not sure whether that ever panned out given the issue with COVID that we encountered that made any travel and direct research very difficult in the last um, year and a half. But it does seem to me that there is a big chunk of information missing. For instance, there's a great deal of discussion about Iran's um, creation of cultural centers that both attract members of the Lebanese communities but also appeal to potential converts. And we know how they generally operate from the general scheme of that elsewhere, but there is not a lot of very hard data with respect to the details of the process. We know a number of these centers, but still, it's not very in-depth research about them. I believe they exist also in Colombia and Brazil and other countries.
Yeah, the main centers, they are in Colombia. As I said, we don't have a lot of data about it because even on academia, the main research we have concerning these communities, they are ethnographic researches, fieldwork research, so anthropologists who go and live in some communities. So we don't know for sure, but these activities of these groups are focused more on Colombia and Venezuela because Hugo Chavez had a lot of ties with Ahmadinejad. In 2005, Brazil also was close to Iran, but it was like more a diplomatic thing because Lula wanted to make Brazil a global player. So Brazil even tried to break a nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran together with Turkey. It didn't go well. But at the same time that Brazil was receiving Ahmadinejad, Lula was receiving him in Brazil. Lula was also receiving Shimon Peres and the leader of the Palestinian Authority. So Brazil was trying to be like a peacemaker in the Middle East, and that's one of the
Hmm.
reasons why we received Ahmadinejad. Although there was a lot of protest, and the Jewish community, of course, was um, deeply concerned about these ties. But after Lula, Brazil and Iran got more distanced from each other, especially because after Lula, we had a female president, Dilma Rousseff, so she was concerned about the situation of women in Iran and human rights. But in Colombia, we have these centers, and in Venezuela as well. And basically, they offer free education to those who are willing to become Muslims. So they train some young people, young men especially. They take them to Iran, and they stay there for about 1 month, learning more about the Islamic doctrine and Islamic theology. And those who have the potential to be missionaries, Islamic clerics, they stay in Iran for longer time, prepare themselves, and return to Brazil and produce content in Spanish. And now some of them are starting to produce content in Portuguese as well. But the Iranian community in Brazil, the Muslim Shia community in Brazil is still very small. Uh, the Muslim community actually in Brazil and Latin America as a whole is still very small. So we don't have a lot of data about the activities of the centers and if they are being successful or not in their efforts, because so far we don't have many like prominent, or we don't see a bigger impact on society. We don't see a big number of conversions to Islam, not even online. We don't see much of that.
Hmm. It's interesting. Might also be because there is a strong religious local culture and spiritual local cultures. I think it might be easier to get converts in more disaffected parts of the world. But
Indeed.
that brings us to Iran's cooperation with existing groups, where I think it's more successful in gaining partners and proxies than necessarily direct converts. And that brings me to FARC. Before we get into the potential relationship with Iran or Iran's relationships with cartels, can you tell us, for the audience, what is FARC exactly? How did they originate, and what's the history of U.S. cooperation with Colombia over this issue?
Okay, so the FARC they started in 1964 during the context of the Cold War. There were a lot of Marxist militias in Latin America, and they wanted to create Marxist revolutions, just like what happened with Cuba. And so they started to have like a military branch, a military arm. So this group, the FARC, as they say in Spanish, their name is the Revolutionary Armed Force of Colombia, and they started to use money from drug trafficking to finance their activities, and they started to have some kind of terrorist activities in Colombia. And all they wanted was to seize power, to get into power, and according to their manifestos, create this kind of Marxist society. So for about 50 years, there was this war inside of Colombia, kind of a civil war between the FARC and the governmental forces. I think that almost 200,000 people died because of this conflict. According to the UN, we have 5 million internally displaced people as a consequence of the conflicts between the government and the FARC. And in 2016, after some attempts of negotiations, there was a peace deal between the FARC and the government, and some members of the FARC they created other militias. Others left the FARC as a whole. And now, 5 years after this peace agreement, there's a lot of debate inside of Colombia, because some people say that the government didn't fulfill its part on the agreement, and other people say that the FARC didn't do it. The fact is that there are still armed militias in Colombia. Many of them, the FARC received a lot of support from the Venezuelan government, especially Hugo Chavez, and now also with Maduro. And to make things worse, we also have a lot of Venezuelan refugees living in Colombia. It's almost 2 million Venezuelans are living in Colombia right now. So the situation is really complicated in the country, especially because of COVID and all this political instability in the region. And I can imagine how destabilizing this number of refugees has been for the Colombia political scenario and also for economics and everything, because Here in Brazil, we received just 80,000 Venezuelans. I live in the northeast of Brazil, far away from the Venezuelan border, and I see Venezuelans begging on the street every single day in my city. So I can imagine how complicated has been the situation in Colombia because of the actions also of the Venezuelan government in partnership with the FARC and other actors.
So now that what could you tell us a little bit more about the nature of the peace deal with the Colombian government? What was each party's obligation? What were each party's obligations that people are claiming not to have been fulfilled?
Yeah, indeed. So there are some accusations that the new president, Ivan Duque Marques, he has been against this peace deal since the beginning. And so people say that he is trying to change the terms of the agreement and trying to reduce the responsibility of the government and not integrating enough people, and also some other obligations concern the distribution of land and things like that. And at the same time, some people who are against the deal since the beginning says that the FARC just decided to do the deal because they knew they were losing their space, they are losing um, their power. So for them, the deal was much better because they would be seen just as a political party and would have the possibility of creating different cells, different groups. So there is these accusations from both sides, from those who are against the deal and those who supported the deal. They blame both sides for the failures in the implementation.
And so what happened as a result? You mentioned that some people joined additional armed militias. What have they been doing since the peace deal?
Sorry, could you repeat again? I think it cut it a little
Well,
bit for me.
you mentioned that some of the FARC members joined different armed militias. What have those militias been doing since the signing of the deal?
They keep doing their drug activities because that was also part of the deal that the FARC would give up their activities with drug dealing because their main source of income was through drug dealing, especially cocaine and coca and other drugs like that. So these militias they still cultivate that and keep doing their armed activities and in some regions of the country and trying to control some territories and still fighting with the government.
And has FARC formed a political party that's capable of running in the elections?
Yes, even before the deal, actually, they have it. It's called Democratic Union, if I'm not forsaken, if I remember. But they are already running the elections even before they do. That's what makes the situation of the FARC a little bit similar of Hezbollah, because Hezbollah also started with as a terrorist group, as an armed group, and now they have a representation in the Lebanese government. So the same happens with FARC.
So, and they haven't changed their platform at all from this Marxist kind of ideology, correct? Is it just the same thing but now more legitimate and with
Yes,
political?
actually, today the FARC they don't care much about ideology. At the end, it was just a dispute for power. What they wanted was to seize power at all costs, no matter how. So yes, there is still this Marxist justification, but now in Latin America as a whole, this is not as strong as it used to be. Now the left has new demands, has a new agenda, so the Marxist issue is not as strong as it used to be.
So, how have they adjusted to this new political climate and have they been successful in the elections or local or any political actions?
Oh no, because the Colombian population they tend to be very against the FARC because all the traumas, a lot of civilians were killed because of the actions of the FARC. So not a lot of civilians they were supportive of this agreement. And even this new president, he's more right wing, and he's is too popular. So people in Colombia don't seem to trust the FARC much.
So, as a political power, they're not nearly the same, enjoying the same level of success as Hezbollah did with its social jihad or whatever back in Lebanon. But they have still maintained some level of coordination with the drug activities. So now I wanted to discuss that a little bit. What is the nature uh of their relationship with drug cartels? And what's the whole issue with Pablo Escobar, for instance? Um, did they have anything to do with that?
Um, Sorry again. Could you also repeat the last part because there was a failure here in the connection?
Oh, I was asking about the relationship between FARC and the drug cartels, and I also asked about Pablo Escobar and whether there was any coordination or links at all.
Oh yes, there was a coordination between the FARC and Pablo Escobar, and actually after his death, the FARC they needed a new source of income, so they looked for Venezuela, and then the Venezuelan government became one of the main sponsors of the FARC. But yes, there's this relation with the cartels, and not only with Pablo Escobar, but also with Mexican cartels and other drug dealers in the region.
And my understanding that the Biden administration has removed the terrorist designation because they felt that it would somehow strengthen the peace deal. Can you tell me? And this came to us, average outside observers. This came out of the blue. There was never any much discussion about FARC and Biden. It was never part of the major U.S. agenda or campaigns, or there was never really any discussion about it. It was sort of unexpected for average people. So, was there any engagement between the Colombian government and the Biden administration prior to the removal of the terrorist designation? Was it coordinated in any way?
Uh, no, I think that this designation is part of a much broader agenda of Biden's foreign policy, because Biden wants to close some old chapters and open new chapters in the U.S. Engagement with the world. We've seen that in Afghanistan, but we have similar examples of designations like what's happening with FARC. So, for example, the State Department doesn't consider Nigeria a country of personal specific concern when it comes to religious freedom,
Mm-hmm.
which is really complicated because Christians are being slaughtered in Nigeria. There are a lot of problems with human rights. So I think that it's much more Biden trying to show that he's doing a different foreign policy than what Trump did. So even when we read the justification that was given to take the FARC off the list of terrorist organizations, was that Biden wanted to strengthen the peace deal, and also recognizing that the FARC they don't exist anymore as they used to be, and so the U.S. should prioritize these new cells and malicious groups that are created after the peace deal. But I think that it doesn't make sense because some of these militias are still related to the FARC. So we could still recognize them as terrorist organizations without removing the FARC. You could keep the FARC and also these other terrorist organizations, because the fact that the FARC are weakened and that they are not strong as they used to be doesn't mean they don't operate anymore. I think that it'd be possible to make this distinction between the political party and the militia, the armed army, the the military part of the FARC, and I think that what Biden did was just as part of this more rhetoric and strategy of trying to show that the US is acting differently.
So this was sounds like it was a completely unilateral decision that was not coordinated with the Colombian government and may have come as a surprise to them. But this is I'm trying to understand what the U.S. policy on Colombia has been uh, in the past, nearly year since Biden's um, tenure started, and it hasn't been really clear what has been discussed or achieved in the relations between the two countries. What is the context for this sudden announcement? Is there a context? Has there been any particular dialogue that we should be aware of?
Yeah, the U.S. has been one of the main partners of Colombia in the fight against the FARC. So there was a plan that the U.S. gave a lot of money for Colombia to fight the FARC and also to grow the economy of the country and develop as a nation, especially during the time of the war on terror and the Bush administration. So I think that for the Biden administration, it's perceived as one of the places that the US was engaging and expending a lot of money, and now that things are changing, that the US is reducing their influence and their actions around the world. Biden was like trying to close a chapter, because according to the what we have heard from the Secretary of State, the is that okay? We had this problem with FARC. There was like 5 decades of war inside Colombia, but then they made this peace deal. Things are more stable now than what they used to be. So let us just move on. Let's overcome the FARC and all that's been in the past. I think that in this regard, it's very similar to what happened in Afghanistan. The idea that the US had already done all that the US could do in Afghanistan. So now it was time for the Afghan government to deal with this problem. So I think that it was part of this idea of Biden of disengaging with some parts of the world.
And has there been any sort of coordination on new policies or any policies with the Colombian government? Because, as I said, with Taliban, at least everyone was aware that the U.S. was engaged in protracted negotiations. So, at the very least, whether or not the Afghan government was happy with it or not, people were aware that there was this communication going on between the parties. Here, I'm not hearing anything but the US and Colombian government engagement in general. Has Biden been engaged with them on any issue or level outside of this? Is there a context for the Biden administration for this announcement specifically? This is what I'm trying to understand because to me, there's a big piece of information missing from all of this.
Yeah. Um, the same thing is happening here in South America. We don't have much information. Actually, we don't have we still don't have a clear understanding of what is Biden's foreign policy for the region. So there was this suspect that he would do it, that there would be this announcement, but a lot of people were surprised when it was announced. So what we have heard is that Biden is conducting some kind of secret talks with some governments in the region, trying to negotiate with them, trying to get their help, their cooperation to deal with other issues, especially with the migration crisis. So, for example, a lot of people are asking why Biden has been silent on Brazil's president Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro has been a close friend of Trump. He has said that the elections in the US, there was a fraud, that Trump really won the elections. Bolsonaro created a lot of kind of embarrassing situations with American diplomats in Brazil, and Biden has remained silent. And some people think that's because Biden's trying to negotiate with Brazil for Brazil to receive some Haitians who are on the border. So it seems that a strategy is to not directly not engage openly with some South American governments, but deal with them like secretly in order to break these deals with other issues. So we also have a problem of many people trying to enter in the US illegally, especially the number of Brazilians. So, and also there's this question of the Venezuelans, a lot of Venezuelans here in South America. So, of course, Biden doesn't want these Venezuelans to go also to the border and try to get into the US. So, probably he will try to offer some economic help for the countries here to receive and keep these refugees. Something like what the European Union has done with Turkey when it comes to the Syrian refugees. So we are still expecting to see what's going to happen. It's interesting because what I have realized is that even some sectors of the left, they are very skeptical and critical of Biden and especially of Kamala Harris. There's the feeling of deception of expecting him to have done much more, especially when it comes to the border and immigration, because they're like very sensitive issues here in the region. And so we are like in the dark as well. We don't know much what to expect about the US foreign policy for the region.
Well, I seem to be hearing the same thing from everyone, no matter what country or region of the world they're in, which seems that there's no strategy for anything anywhere.
Yeah.
And sadly, but circling back a little bit to this situation with FARC and these narco dealings, earlier today, Senator Ted Cruz from Texas raised his concern concerning this removal of designation, comparing the situation to the removal of the Iran-backed Houthis from the foreign terrorist organization listing, which was one of the first foreign policy decisions made by the Biden administration and which had backfired tremendously because after being removed, the Houthis refused to really engage with the U.S. diplomats and kind of made fun of this whole process on Al Jazeera and so forth. And so the concern from critics like Senator Cruz has been that the removal would not only not strengthen this or close this chapter, but actually empower the militants in the FARC ranks to recruit more successfully, to feel kind of impunity, to you know to remove the leverage from the Colombian government and kind of reverse the process. Do you think that's that concern is valid?
Yes, I think so because what I realized that there's this attempt of normalizing some actors here in South America as legitimate actors, and that happens a lot with FARCs trying to portray them as a resistant movement, and the same thing happens with Hezbollah and even Hamas. So here in Brazil, for example, is like a taboo to say that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization because there's all these questions. Who are designating them as terrorist organizations? Is just the US, or is the US and the European Union or other countries? So there's always these suspicions that the US has some kind of bad interest in the region, and that's why they are designating some groups as terrorist groups. So when you have the US refraining for calling the FARC as a terrorist group, there is this idea that look, even the US now doesn't recognize them as a terrorist group anymore. So why should we? So I think that these concerns they are valid.
And who exactly is behind the normalization of these groups? Who is pushing this uh, sort of closing, not just integrating them, but closing their eyes on their bad activities?
Especially the left, because during many years the left was in power in South America, and now we had like a more left right wing wave, especially like here in Brazil, but also in Argentina, Chile, other countries. But some of
But in
the
Argentina, the
right wing
recent
governments they
elections.
haven't been
Mhm.
so good, especially in handling the economy.
But in Argentina,
Oh
despite the
yeah,
success
the
from
left
the
came to
right,
power.
the left
That's
has
what
been
I would say. Uh,
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
what has it?
because when it comes to economy, sorry,
Mhm.
you can say it's because it's cutting here.
Yeah, 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 I was just going to ask why, despite the economic successes from the right, has the left come back so quickly and easily in Argentina, and can it
Oh,
happen in
that
other countries?
yes, yeah, that's what I would say because there has that actually the economic success hasn't been seen by the people. So the number of unemployment and the high prices, all of that is something that people look at it and they think the right doesn't know how to handle the economy in a good way. And they remember that when the left was in power, the economy was better. So that's the perception here in Brazil. We think that Bolsonaro will lose. All the polls show that Lula, the former president from the Labour Party, will return to power because there's this perception, especially among poor people, that the left was better when it comes to economy. And so there's this attempt of people in the left to normalize the actions of groups like the FARC and even of regime, Nicaraguan regime. So criticism. So
Hmm.
okay,
So,
so here in Brazil, for example,
mhm.
the left is receiving a lot of criticism from the right and from the center for supporting dictatorships around the world. So here in Brazil, for example, we still have left-wing parties that don't call Cuba a dictatorship. There are people on the left who still support the Cuban government and try to justify their actions. So there's still a lot of debate about what happened during the Cold War, because there's this idea that the US had evil plans for the region. So some people try to portray the FARC as a resistance movement against capitalism, against imperialism. So there's this attempt to normalize not only the FARC, but also other groups and left wing governments in the region.
Coming back a little bit to the whole thing with Iran, which has also made very, and its proxies have made very successful alliances with drug cartels in Mexico and elsewhere, with Venezuelans and so forth. Do you see that the normalization of FARC and the return to power of these left wing governments will empower Iran's hold on the region? Not perhaps directly through conversions, but through economic and political relations, through the proxies it will send over, through drug, especially cooperation.
I don't think so, because the Iran had this important role in the region because of the Venezuelan regime, because of Hugo Chavez and later Maduro. But now they are very, very weakened. They are not so strong. They are weak. Venezuela is a chaos right now. It's almost a failed state. High levels of poverty. So only Venezuela still has close ties to Iran. The Arabic countries are much more important for Latin American countries because of commerce and economic ties. So I think that in the wake of the Abrahamic Accords, the South American countries are getting closer to Israel and also to the Arabic countries, the countries of the Gulf. There was this problem because many South American countries used to be against Israel at the UN, for example, afraid of displeasing the Arabic countries. And now it's been different. So in the case of Brazil, Bolsonaro has portrayed himself as the best friend of Israel in the region, and at the same time, he has close friendship with the Gulf countries. Has been to Saudi Arabia. He has been to Qatar and the Arab United Emirates twice. So I think that the South American countries gonna side more with the Arab countries in this new configuration of the Middle East, if you can call like that. And also, Israel is investing a lot. So, especially in Colombia, the Colombian government now is much closer to Israel. All the economic agreements that they have made. Some countries in Central America have recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. So I think that in the future, Latin America will side more with the Arabs and with Israel. Even in Brazil, for example, Iran is an important economical partner. But the president of Brazil has congratulated the U.S. for killing Soleimani. That created a little bit of tension, but there was no economic retaliation. So I think that Iran has understood that its influence in Latin America is diminishing. Of course, they still have Venezuela, but Venezuela is not as strong and as influential as it used to be. So I think that Iran now is looking for other parties of the world to engage and look for partners.
But in what if Bolsonaro loses and the left returns to power? Don't you think that will provide Iran with an opening?
Um, I don't think so because the reason why Brazil got close to Iran, especially Lula, was because he wanted to make Brazil a global player. So maybe he will try to get closer to Iran, but he will also have in mind the importance of the Gulf countries and Israel. Because even when he was negotiating with Iran, he was also trying to negotiate with Israel. And he also made agreements with Israel when he was negotiating with Iran. So even recently, Lula has spoken about his commitment with Israel, saying that Brazil will remain supporting a two-state solution, and the idea will be try to make Brazil a friend of everybody. Of course, that's impossible in the Middle East, but that's what he'll try to do. I think that will be his strategy. He will not choose Iran over the Arab countries and over Israel.
Coming back to Iran's cooperation with Colombia against kind of Iran-backed terrorism, do you think that in the event that FARC becomes more overpowered thanks to these policies, can Israel, rather than the basically become a substitute for the U.S. in that regard and play the same role that U.S. Has played in containing these militias and uh, as we have seen, Israel has proven to be an important security partner in stopping the attempted assassination and in counterterrorism operation that we have seen recently. Can it play that role in a more expanded context? And do you think it will?
I think so. I think there's a lot of potential for cooperation between Colombia and other countries with Israel when it comes to security issues. I don't think that Israel will engage directly, like the US used it to do, like giving money and projects, like financing projects like the US used to be. But I think that this security cooperation will remain. And also an interesting fact about the Israeli-Colombia relations is because has invested a lot in the cultural ties. So the Mashaf program that Israel has that offers scholarships for people from other countries to go and study agriculture and technology and all these things. They have a lot of success with Colombia. So a lot of Colombians they have gone to Israel to study there, and also many Israelis when they finish their time at the IDF, they come to South America, they come to Colombia. So there is a lot of cultural exchange between the two countries. So I think that Israel will also focus on that because besides of these more solid, more hard threats that Israel faces in the region because of Hezbollah and Hamas. There's also a war on the public opinion because a lot of people in South America they tend to be anti-Israel because of all the left-wing narrative in support of the Palestinians and the fight against the U.S. against the imperialism, so against Israel as a whole. So I think that one of the things that Israel should invest more in Latin America is also in the public opinion, like especially
Soft
fighting
power.
BDS BDS movement is really strong here in the region, in academia, and also in arts.
So basically, you are there is a lot of room for exerting more soft power on the cultural level, and academic level.
Yeah.
Um, mhm. Well, the U.S. is unfortunately facing the same problem with the academia. The hard left, the Marxists, and various assorted movements and BDSers have taken hold of the academic forum, and unfortunately that produces generations of students who are far less friendly to Israel and than previous generations. I am concerned about this trend, the trend not of current BDS activities, but the fact that the younger generations go through these institutions, whether in Colombia, in Brazil, or anywhere else, and come out already indoctrinated, and what to do with them then. Uh, we are kind of facing this dilemma with the US refusing to play any sort of role other than on climate change, with very mixed results, to put it mildly, and on immigration issues. And um, there's a lot of expectation in Israel to become this substitute power, but Israel is a very small country, does not have the same economy as the US, and is located far away and is facing its own internal and external issues, so it cannot be everywhere, despite the fact that it has been very successful in its diplomatic outreach. What is there an expectation for other actors to kind of come in? For instance, is there concern that China might replace the U.S. as the main mover and shaker in the region?
Yes, that's exactly what I would mention. That I think that China has much more potential to fill this gap that the US is leaving than Israel. And actually, in some ways, China is already doing it. So right now, we have a lot of debate in Brazil because the president Bolsonaro is openly pro-US. So here in Brazil, we already assume that there is this Cold War, and you need to take a side. And China is working on that very strongly. So we had a lot of diplomatic crisis between Brazil and China already because of that. Businessmen and offering more economic gains and economic profits. So I think that there will be this temptation for many South American countries to side with China because of the economic gains they will have, and also because of this lack of leadership of the US in the region. So yes, I think that the US should be more concerned with China than with other actors here in South America, because that's something that has already started to happen, and especially if the left comes to power. So, for example, last week, the Brazilian former president Dilma Rousseff, she's from the Labour Party, and she's a friend of Lula that can be reelected next year. She said that the West is facing a crisis, and China is like a light for us. China is a model to be followed.
So to finish up quickly, you mentioned that the million Venezuelans would be best served with international cooperation to resolve the issue. What would that look like?
Um, I think that it'd be like what should have done with the Syrians, because when you had the beginning of the war in Syria in 2011, a lot of refugees they fled to countries like Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. And just in 2015, when these countries could not receive any more refugees, people is starting to trying to get to Europe and other countries. So I think that if the international community had acted before, with economic projects to create temporary jobs and economic opportunities for them to remain close to Syria and return when things were possible, we wouldn't have seen what we saw in Europe. So I think that the same is going to happen here in South America. If we don't act now, if countries don't act now to provide money and also create like economic opportunities, create jobs for them to keep working, but also be close to Colombia, to Venezuela, to one day return when situation is better, we can have much more problems in the future.
I couldn't agree with you more. Let's hope that the Biden administration wakes up and understands that even if it wants to do things differently, it has an opportunity to take the lead on this issue and to push the international community to multilateral action on this, rather than just focusing exclusively on secret deals no one knows about, or climate change with that benefits private parties more than population. So, you know, before somebody else solves that in a way that that does not necessarily benefit anyone involved, and before this problem becomes, completely out of control. With that, thank you so much for joining us. I've learned a great deal. I think Latin America is a fascinating region that that deserves a lot more attention, deserves a lot more real in-depth understanding, engagement on all levels, from the US, from other countries, from academics and researchers and regular people just who just want to understand the cultures beyond, what they see on TV and hear from political activists. And I really hope to see that happen. I hope to hear a lot more from the Philos Project, from people like yourself about this in the future. And thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for telling us, for sharing your thoughts and insights with us. And thanks to everyone who's been watching this segment and for your patience with the internet issues. We'll be back next week, same time, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. Thank you again and have a great night.